our American way of life. Isn't it grand? Peace, freedom, and bacon and eggs.
My little pony dream castle, a beautiful place to comb their pretty hair.
Seeing as this amazing project is going to take a lot of work.
Extremely short on animation stats.
Whether they acknowledge it or not, they will have a pressure on them to upload each episode on a semi-regular basis.
And goodbye, Stable Tec Studios.
Production of Episode 1 and the Fallout Equestria series is being cancelled. This, in other terms, means that Stable Tec Studios is shutting down.
Fallout Equestria. It's such a crazy sounding concept when you say it out loud like that. It's one of those things that must seem surreal for anyone hearing it for the first time. To some extent, I was one of those people. I'm most known in the fandom for writing pony parody versions of famous songs, as well as the symphonic metal operas that I did with the L Train. At Stable Tec, I was officially the music director, and then also the voice director for Episode 1. I organized promos and trailers, led production on most of our music and songs, and created the radio play series Confessions of a Wasteland Pony, while later contributing to Terminal Secrets. I discovered My Little Pony: Friendship is Magic about a month before Season 2 aired. It was during the summer of 2011 when what would become the Brony fandom was energized by this unapologetic affection everyone had for this show made for little girls. In August of that year, Fallout Equestria was already halfway completed. You see, the timing really mattered because just 1 year before that, Fallout New Vegas was released, and it became arguably the most beloved game in the revitalized series.
New Vegas and My Little Pony having such similar release windows really was lightning in a bottle, priming both fandoms with creative energy. Though I'm now a freelance writer and animator, during the days of Stable Tec, I was a member of their writing team, best known for creating the Stable Talk podcast and the Terminal Secrets series. In brief, Fallout Equestria is the story of Little Pip, a unicorn living in Stable 2, 200 years after a war between zebras and ponies. One day, the stable's most beloved entertainer, Velvet Remedy, goes missing, and Little Pip goes out in search of her.
It was such a surprisingly good synthesis of the two properties. I don't think there's anyone who is part of both individual fandoms who doesn't also like Fallout Equestria and the giant sub-fandom that it's created. Once it was completed in December of 2011, it was described as legendary by Equestria Daily, and it's hard to argue with that assessment now that you see how many fan works followed it. As I said, I knew of it when I first became a brony, but really didn't pay it much attention. I was barely coming to terms with my own enjoyment of the My Little Pony, let alone fanfiction works from it. On top of that, being halfway through university, I didn't have time to read something that was over 600,000 words long. It wouldn't be until over a year later when I ended up listening to Fallout Equestria when someone named Craze Rambling finished recording it as an audiobook. Experiencing the story in that way, as an audiobook, would end up being a major inspiration for my own works to follow. It was over the holidays of 2012 that I decided I wanted to create my own place in the fandom. All of my previous creative outlets had run dry, so I thought it was a perfect time to jump in. I'd been listening to a whole variety of brony music over the previous year and wanted to try my hand in that. I'm not much of a composer, but I could sing and write lyrics, so I did just that, taking inspiration from the likes of Weird Al and creating my own parodies of various songs, by ponifying them. Eventually, in spring of 2013, I listened to all 64 hours of the Fallout Equestria audiobook and really became enraptured by it. So, naturally, I started making parodies about that. I started out with a rewrite of Radioactive by Imagine Dragons, calling it Facing the Fallout. And for some reason, people seemed to like it. I soon rewrote the most famous song from the modern Fallout series, I Don't Want to Set the World on Fire, originally by the Inkspots. This was at the same time Tyler Teschke was making his early Fallout Equestria animations. During that summer of 2013, I was trying to get involved in various projects as a VA, and I was hoping, more than anything, to find my way into a Fallout Equestria project of some kind. I even released a number of demos on my channel playing different characters in the segments. Eventually, a friend from another production I was part of introduced me to Tyler Teschke. Teschke had a very bold plan of turning all of Fallout Equestria into an animated series. I don't think most of us were really thinking about the realistic prospects of such a task, and that realism would eventually destroy the studio, but we were all drawn in by the idea of it. I mean, could you imagine a full series in the MLP Flash animation style about Fallout Equestria? That would be a dream come true. And Tyler's own animations were sort of the bait that led us all to believe that such a thing was possible. If we could assemble a team of 6 to 10 Teschkes, we could animate 2 episodes a year. At least, that's what I was thinking. We were ways off from that, though. In October of 2013, the team was just me, the VAs that Tyler had assembled for the first promo, the sound director at the time, and Tyler himself. That was the start of Stable Tec Studios. After Tyler had formally welcomed me to the team, I ended up creating a parody of Honest Trailers for a special video on my own channel.
An era of peace and love disappeared into one of war, hatred, and a jealous grabbing of natural resources, leading to one freaking cool apocalypse, Fallout Equestria.
The video was essentially a love letter to the story, but I used it as an opportunity to promote the animated series as well. At the same time, I was introduced to a separate group called Friendly Raiders Productions, which were in the middle of their own ambitious idea of converting the story into a series of 3 feature-length films.
I was finishing up my final year of high school when I saw someone post on an MLP group about Friendly Raider Productions, a team that was creating 3 feature-length film adaptations of Fallout Equestria. I'd heard the name Fallout Equestria before, but that's about as far as my familiarity went. Whilst I'd been a fan of ponies for about a year, at this point I'd never even played a Fallout game. But I was interested in becoming a writer. I wanted to go into the film industry, and I thought this would look really great on my portfolio, which at the time consisted of a few short stories and a machinima that would never be finished. It's fair to say that I was fairly ignorant when it came to how film worked, and even what most of the terminology was. Proof of that comes in the form of how I ended up at Friendly Raiders. They put up a job posting for storyboarders, and I, not knowing what those actually were, assumed they were talking about writers. I guess they figured out that I was a writer, not an artist, because they still hired me, and I felt myself in the writing department.
If I recall, the story would have been split between the opening sections about the team coming together, God and the Griffins and Mr. Topaz. Then the second movie would have been the large chunk of the Red Eye plotline. Then finally the third movie would have been about the Grand Pegasus Enclave and those final chapters. It probably would have been similar to the Hobbit movies in terms of adapted structure. They would have likely had to move some things around and make them 3 somewhat independent narratives.
Of course, Friendly Raiders weren't just advertising within circles of Facebook groups, and they'd started sending out emails to animators and more well-known figures in the fanbase, like Captain Horse, animator of the Toffee parody and writer of Duck and Cover.
I got a message from a bunch of people describing themselves as Friendly Raider Studios. They'd evidently not blind CC'd the note, so I could see everyone else who they sent the message to. Friendly Raider sent me this message saying, "Hey, we're making an adaptation of Fallout Equestria into animation, and we'd like some artists." And I was already an animator at this point, and I'm pretty sure that I was the only actual animator that they sent a note to, because, again, the lack of blind CC. And basically I replied to them saying, "Hey, you know what you guys are trying to do is really not practical at all." And I didn't get a reply. I think I left a message to the effect of, I appreciate what you guys are trying to do, but unless you make this list of very specific, this very specific list of instructions, like abridging the story and like some stuff to do with coordination and getting a bunch of different people with different art styles to work together, because at this point I'd already done collaborative work for Buck, and I was kind of in the process of tearing my hair out trying to work with people. So I knew that any studio that was going to try and get a whole load of brony artists to work together was going to have its work cut out for it, trying to get anyone to cooperate.
The team at Friendly Raiders was starting to put their story together and construct their new team, which led me to being put in the position of lead writer, despite me having no experience and no earthly idea what I was doing.
All I cared about was that they were having VA auditions, and when those auditions were all said and done, I had been cast as DJ Pony, Red Eye, and Steel Hooves, as well as a handful of extras.
Skybolt ended up in the chat rooms for Friendly Raiders, and whilst I don't remember what I said, I do remember being kind of a dick. He was saying something about the story that I disagreed with, and my attitude was, well, I'm the head of story, so I automatically win the argument. I'm not even sure he remembers that.
Stable Tec was growing incrementally through that autumn of 2013, but it was one production in particular that would cause it to explode in growth. Around Thanksgiving, Tyler Teschke and I were just BSing in one of the Skype chat rooms we had set up when the idea of doing a Christmas animation was brought up. I mentioned the various Christmas song parodies I'd done the year before, and we eventually settled on the perfect name: Nuclear Winter Wonderland. The phrase is famous in the Fallout fandom because it was essentially the arrow to the knee meme, but of New Vegas. You hear NCR soldiers say it all the time when you're walking around.
Patrolling the Mojave almost makes you wish for a nuclear winter.
I wrote a script for the opening, and we gathered the main cast VAs to do their lines and sing. The song received tons of views and downloads, both for the animation and the song itself, with a separate video on my own channel that was growing rapidly popular at the same time.
A nuclear winter wonderland where the air raid sirens ring.
While Nuclear Winter Wonderland was taking off, I was brokering a merger between Stable Tec Studios and Friendly Raiders Productions.
That you are a valued member of Friendly Raider Productions. This video is to inform you that Friendly Raider has been acquired by Stable Tec Studios. This merger is for the good of us all, as we will be doubling our manpower by working together to bring Fallout Equestria to life. However, to become a part of Stable Tec, you will be required to go through a short vetting process to be sure that our team is filled with enthusiastic and productive members who will benefit instead of slow down the production. Thank you for your cooperation during this transition process, and welcome to Stable Tec Studios.
As we figured out how to combine the assets and settle which VAs would still be playing which characters. While I wouldn't be playing Steel Hooves anymore, at least under that original agreement, I would still be able to play DJ Pony and Red Eye. The DJ Pony casting was especially important to me because I had already been toying around with an idea of what I could do with that character.
Despite Friendly Raiders being a fair bit unorganized, I was still quite apprehensive when I found out that we were being absorbed into the much larger and more well-known Stable Tec.
Stable Tec represents the sort of early, passion-led, we don't know what we're doing, but we're giving it a go anyway kind of approach that works when you have a lot of ambient enthusiasm and there's no expectations. People are learning what to do with the tools they have.
In the aftermath of the merger, I was informed by the head of Friendly Raiders that I would no longer be holding the role of lead writer. In fact, I wouldn't be on the writing team at all. Every member of the Friendly Raiders team would need to apply to Stable Tec if we wanted to keep our jobs. And Stable Tec already had a lead writer in the form of Daniel Mohan.
How did I end up as the head of the writing team? I was in an art call with the directors one day. We were chatting away and they brought up their lack of decent writers. I had had a few things published in magazines and newspapers, and I just happened to be working towards my creative writing degree in university at the time. So I mentioned this and they asked me to knock up a sample script for them to take a look at. I wrote something up over the course of a weekend, and it not only landed me the position as head of the writing team, but it eventually became the script for the first episode. The only one the general public would end up seeing, as it turned out.
But it became apparent very soon that Mohan was a much better writer than I was, certainly more experienced. Instead, I took it as an opportunity to learn and to become a better writer under his teaching.
On top of that, I would become the music and voice director for the combined studio. I had been a voice director in a previous production and had proven myself at both jobs in organizing Nuclear Winter Wonderland.
And so I became the newest member of Stable Tech's writing team under the department lead Daniel Mohan. Alongside me were several others, but for now I want to draw attention to JD Parks and Sonic Lightning, who also went by Aaron Petruzzi, who would become the deputy lead of the writing department.
And that's how the stage was set for 2014.
Even those of us with no experience and little understanding of how film and animation worked knew this was going to be a massive undertaking. Whilst the studio had already been around for a few months and work had already begun, this was still only the start. We had a lot to prove and already so many fans of Fallout Equestria waiting to see if we could pull this off. This was the beginning of the great experiment.
Some of you got the time. I've been watching you since the moment you arrived. A boat from Manhattan with candlelight bling. Think that you can handle some valley swing. What is that sweet aroma that fills the air? A scent I would breathe in most anywhere. It's drawing me in and pulling me to you. And every thought I have turns the language blue. All at once it's like the sky fell down, leaving us alone in this crazy town. So hold me close and leave your worries be, for one last dance of just you and me.
It was immediately apparent that while Tyler Teschke might have started Stable Tec Studios, he was not keen on managing the large number of people joining the fray. As the leadership was organizing in early 2014, Tyler sought out a studio director to lead the day-to-day operations, while all of us still recognized Tyler as the owner or final authority of the channel, since he did create it. I was really hopeful of this, to be honest, because I thought that meant that Tyler would focus on being animation director. 2013 had proven that that was his strong suit by far. I started off 2014 really trying to prove myself as music and voice director. Once the script was done, I began working with the VAs to get all their lines recorded. I went and sought out musicians to join the team and contribute to the score. Each of them worked on various themes and concepts, pieces of the script that we could potentially turn into leitmotifs and themes to be used across the series. I thought each musician could lead a specific kind of sound or environment, and it'd be a great way to split up the work and give every location or faction a unique sound. And we got the job done. By June of 2014, we had a full set of music for the first episode, and all the lines were recorded. Butterscotch, the original sound director, had assembled a great package of sound effects. He also composed the main theme for the series, except for a minor change I had to make later. I'm not the best composer, but as music director, I did my best to act as the best producer I could be. Every track that came in from the various musicians, I would return with notes and changes to help everything gel together and unite as a complete body of work. By early July of 2014, I had assembled every piece of audio for that first episode, broken them up by scenes from the script, and it was all ready for the animators to play with and use to set a pace for the animatic. As I explained to them, if they just arrange the things in the timing they want, I could go back at the end and move everything to line up on a master timeline, all the audio would sound clean, and they'd have more freedom to time things out themselves. That was every piece of audio ready for episode 1. I had fully completed my job for that first episode. I sent an email with that package to all of the main studio leadership at the time, and it was ignored for over a year.
Within the writing team, the morale was incredibly high. With the first season having mostly finished its first drafts, JD and I were so excited at the pace of the project that we were already talking through the ideas of a sequel series. Friendship Never Changes was going to take place after the sacrifice of Little Pip, during that 10-year time skip that occurs before the final chapter of the book. We actually managed to do a story outline for an entire first season. We created concept art for new characters and even wrote a few episode drafts. I forgot about that before I started thinking back on my time at Stable Tec, and some of us were definitely getting ahead of ourselves.
While I was organizing the music and voice actors, I was also really interested in joining the writing team. I'd gotten a taste for writing on smaller script things in the past, such as the opening to Nuclear Winter Wonderland, and I wanted to work on larger things if I could. One thing that I was aware of, especially during the merger of Stable Tec and Friendly Raiders, was that we'd have a lot of VAs who wouldn't be very happy waiting for months and years to play small bit parts and background characters. It had already been a point of contention that the main character VAs were set in place. Many people wanted to do a full recasting. So one solution I was considering was a radio play type production where I could play the DJ Pony character and we could write new stories of various Wasteland characters. I was heavily inspired by the World War Z dramatic audiobook. The format of that story and the various characters tell their own experience from the Great Zombie War, and Max Brooks, the writer, played the interview character, assembling the stories in a meta-narrative kind of way. It would be perfect. It would give every VA a chance to be their own main character. Not everyone could be Little Pip, but someone could be Battered Blade. Not everyone could be Steel Hooves, but someone could be Dr. Greenshift. Even before the organizational problems began to appear, I knew animation would take the longest amount of time. Even the best team of animators would take longer than simple audio and text productions. So that's how I pitched Confessions of a Wasteland Pony. I would give all of our VAs a chance to star in something, and at the same time it'd give me a chance to do more writing of my own. Around that same time, spring of 2014, someone had also suggested the idea of creating Ditsy Doo's Wasteland Survival Guide. That would have been a purely text format where we could post a chapter to our new Stable Tec website every week. That would have given our writers something to do regularly. It would give us something to release to the public.
The studio had the right idea when they started with the Wasteland Survival Guide and Confessions. The writing team started working on chapters, getting at least 5 or 6 of them written and edited before the project vanished. I was never too sure why the Wasteland Survival Guide was put on ice. I was a pretty low-level member of the studio at the time, so I wasn't aware of the high-level studio decisions. It's unfortunate because those supplementary projects would have gone a long way in helping just tide the public over while we made the animated series.
Because that was part of the value of both productions. They would be something we could produce and release immediately to fill in the gaps of time the animation process would take. This would really help flush out the channel and give us a chance to expand on the story and universe. Instead, they began slowly transforming the entire 600,000-word novel into screenplay format. The first few episode scripts were already done. We wouldn't need those screenplays for years, but it seemed to me to be more of an academic enterprise than anything else. Which could have been fine. It would have been neat to read all of Fallout Equestria as a serialized screenplay, but the thought of 50-plus episodes of screenplay being produced was one of those first sobering looks at the reality of the animated series. In my opinion, everyone was a little bit too caught up in the idea that this was something we were going to be able to fully realize. I mean, did I want to see it happen? Of course. But I wasn't thinking about the final episode. I was thinking about the first episode. Let's finish one. Let's show them that we are capable of doing this.
Why, hello there, people. I'm John, and man, that's been a while. Okay, I know a lot of you want answers, and that's what I'm here for. Some of you already know, some probably still don't, so let's start from the beginning, I guess. On the 18th of March 2014, we received a C&D letter from Hasbro's legal firm. For those of you who don't know, C&D stands for Cease and Desist, and it's basically a copyright claim that says stop doing pony stuff or there will be legal consequences. Needless to say, we had no choice but to comply and remove pretty much every video that contained pony stuff.
But then, everything started falling apart when one of the most famous brony animators, Jan Animations, got a cease and desist from Hasbro because his animations look so similar to the show's style.
I'd heard about this alongside the rest of the fan base, but I wasn't really aware of how this affected the top level of studio leadership, not until a few months later when mandates started coming down from the top that we needed to start making changes that would make the series less likely to be hit by a C&D.
Everyone acted like we were on the same level of visibility as him, and they started obsessing about C&D proofing our production.
Whilst the character models were being given an art style change, the writing team began work debating new names for characters and locations, a process that went on for a really, really long time, actually, because we weren't happy about the situation at all, but we wanted to ensure that the new names that we were giving were still recognizable and still good. Like, when you hear about the old Ministry Mayor Spectrum, we wanted you to think Rainbow Dash, without us needing to tell you, as an example.
My position from the beginning was, just finish one episode. Let's make something to prove that we can first. There are no Hasbro characters appearing in the first several scripts. The only thing they could potentially complain about was the animation style. So, of course, that had to change. The new animation style was interesting. It wasn't bad per se, but it was different. The public weren't happy about it. They were expecting a show-style production, as were a lot of us in the studio. Regardless, the style change went into effect and was first really seen in our Buck promo. It was a parody of the GOAT from the Fallout series, a test someone would take to find out what kind of career path they'd follow in the vault. It was going to be a way to advertise what kind of positions we still had to fill. Mainly visual art positions and animation and storyboarding, but the other thing we needed, well, I needed, was more musicians that can compose big band style songs, something we had trouble with in comparison to Overmare Studios' music team.
I'd been on a bit of a hot streak with the writing team until this point, doing work for both the animated series and the sequel series Friendship Never Changes, with my scripts receiving fairly strong praise from the writing team. They'd also stirred a fair bit of controversy with regards to some very large changes that I had made to the story, but I argued that they would improve the overall narrative, and those changes, for a time, were allowed to remain in place. That streak ended with my 6th script, a collaboration with JD for a Season 2 episode, which was met with an entirely negative reception. Mohan had found enough issues to justify a full rewrite, and looking back, he was 100% right to make that call, but at the time it was just a shattering moment. I'd been knocking out great scripts, and I was starting to feel like I'd made my mark on the studio, and I was becoming fairly arrogant in the process. That moment was a fall to earth for me. I took a hiatus from the writing team and I joined Steve Davies in PR. So working together, we created Stable Talk, which would be an interview series talking to members of the studio. And first up was the writing team.
I don't know. I have a car. I know which city he's in, and I have a bat. I'm fairly certain I could stop him doing something.
At least mine's a superpower. Yours is just a biological weapon.
Oh, God. What are we doing with our lives, gentlemen?
Around that same time, I was able to complete the pilot episode of Confessions of a Wasteland Pony. It was a pilot in every sense, a demo of what the series could be like. I got basically no support from the studio itself. I wasn't allowed on the writing team, and most of the VAs ignored it for the most part, but a select few had some especially snide comments to sneak in as well. The only saving grace was the visual artist that helped bring the look of Confessions to life, Lee Chung. He helped create the original studio and character art to give the radio play enough visuals to help tell the story effectively. Then when the audition deadline passed for in-studio VAs, I ended up talking to a friend of mine from a past production, I Am Shadow 007. She fit the X-Raider character perfectly, and the 21-minute episode was finished and posted on June 15th of 2014. Despite one repeated audio segment, the success of the series spoke for itself. It got quite a few likes and positive comments. It also demoed what would become the series' theme song, Every Story Must Come to an End, which we'd later release with an opening dialogue segment a few months later.
Every story must come to an end. I wish I could tell you.
In the executive group, Michael Smith, the original studio director that Tyler Teschke had chosen, was beginning to frustrate a lot of people. I had some misgivings about him too, but I think he really was trying to do his best to make the series a reality. He was an animator too, but I'm not sure to what extent he actually contributed to and organized the animation team. Sort of a last straw for him was when he wanted to find a way for the studio to pay him a living wage so that he could devote all of his time to working on the series, despite the fact that the studio had no revenue flow at all at this point. Not only that, but even as an animator, he didn't have a body of work like Tyler Teschke to show us that he could unilaterally produce chunks of animation if he was working on the series full time. I was part of the last meeting and group chat that brought these issues up to Michael Smith, where he ended up resigning as studio director. I didn't want to say much of anything in the meeting, but a lot of the talking still fell on me. I know I bristled a lot of feathers at Stable Tec that year, but I honestly tried my best to move the production on to completing that first episode. More than anything, I just wanted to see that first episode completed. One reason I didn't want to be the main voice in that call was because Michael Smith and I were expected to lead an upcoming Everfree Northwest panel together. We were the two of the 3 studio members that would be there alongside the former Friendly Raiders Productions head, Patrick O'Brien. It was nerve-wracking. I'd never done a panel like that before, and I tried my best to figure out how to include Patrick in the presentation organically. It ended up being a set-aside segment for him to talk about the history of Friendly Raiders and how it all led to this. I ended up becoming the voice of a lot of other things on the channel, mainly because a lot of the promos and music things were the only things we had to post on the channel. I did my best to include people as much as I could, but if it came down to stalling a production or just taking over a position myself, I always chose the latter. There were things operating independently of me. The original Stable Talk behind-the-scenes videos were featuring all the other studio departments. It was a series I had nothing to do with. At the same time, as part of the executive team, I wasn't going to stay quiet on things I thought were bad decisions. I definitely voiced my displeasure with the new visual style. Not only was it not the show style, but it was more complex than the show style. It had more shading and details, things that could exponentially increase the animation time. You could see that just in the little pips side by side we showed at the panel. Then, in the wake of Michael Smith stepping down, 2 new directors began to fill his role, Michael Brugioni and Michael Hall. They were the only Michaels in the studio, so naturally we needed to promote them. Brugioni was part of the visual art team originally, and he had a proposal of making the backgrounds in a sort of 3D SFM Gary's Mod kind of style, where the characters would be animated on top of it, in a similar kind of mixed media way as a show like Cartoon Network's Gumball. Maybe I was just too much of a purist, but I didn't like the look. And the backgrounds weren't the problem anyway. Most of the backgrounds were already done. The failure of the production, the weakest link of it all, came down to the puppets, the character puppets being built by the animators. And again, these were puppets in the new, more complicated animation style. I wasn't part of any visual arts teams at all. I just gave my opinion on some of this stuff because I saw it as either an impediment to the animation process or a betrayal of the audience. Changing the backgrounds or character models was a betrayal of the original promise of the series. I think the last thing visually that I complained about was the look of the stable door. One faction of the team wanted the stable door to look like a really generic rectangular blast door, with the explanation that it looked more like an actual stable door. I mean, yeah, I guess it does, but it also looks like 1,000 other blast doors from 1,000 other sci-fi series. The look of the cog-tooth vault door from the Fallout series is iconic. Whether it has 12 teeth or 9 or 8, the look of it rolling aside from the opening is one that had been carried into the Fallout Equestria fandom. Replacing that with a plain rectangular design was stupid in my opinion. Long after I was gagged and pushed aside, I'd place a tongue-in-cheek mockery of that idea in the counterfeit stable in the third Confessions episode, The Duchess Horror.
I turned the corner at the end of that hallway of wine bottles and found my exit. Between 4 big fermentation tanks was a large metal door that had been slid open. It looked like a barn door, but was made out of the same bunker-grade titanium that Stable 79 was made of.
For me, my hope in the production really died when Confessions was deleted without warning from the channel. All of the team members obsessing with the possibility of a C&D, a C&D which never came, decided that we not only needed to change the colors of the Hasbro characters, but also their names and the names of any place from the original My Little Pony show. Because I'd used things like Celestia and Luna as expressions in Confessions 1, as well as the visual of the Be Strong Applejack statuette, it was deemed a copyright hazard and deleted completely. Not made private, mind you, all the positive comments and responses were wholly removed from the channel. Along with that, the original main theme song was removed as well, because the MLP logo appears for a few seconds over the original opening, which was a piano rendition of the My Little Pony theme. While they let us repost the audio for the time being, I had to compose a replacement opening when the original music didn't want to. Confessions would take a lot more time to remake though. I had to contact Lee, the artist, and we replaced the statuette with the Life Everlasting Snow Globe. Then I had to contact the Battered Blade VA to record new lines with the new names and locations. The whole process took 6 weeks, but it did give me a chance to fix the repeated audio line from the original version.
Now, the animated series had been in production for a few months at this point, and I wanted to do my own thing, and given that Stable Tec had shown willingness to create audio drama with Confessions, I began to formulate my own ideas. It was whilst I was playing through Fallout 3 for the first time that I had the idea for Terminal Secrets, a mini-series about a stable and its experiments told entirely through audio logs.
The vault stories in the Fallout universe were one of its strongest lore-related elements. Each of them was a different social experiment imposed on the captive population. My personal favorite had always been the story of Vault 11 from Fallout New Vegas.
I pitched it to Davies, he said he'd bring it to the studio leads, and I got to work putting together the concepts for Stable 43. Pre-production on Terminal Secrets became more complicated within 2 weeks of it being greenlit. The studio's internal newsletter announced that Terminal Secrets was going to be a long-running series that would tell the stories of multiple stables, and rather than doubling down on the original pitch that I had intended to be simple and quick to finish, I kind of just rolled with what everyone in the studio was saying. I was pretty bad at saying no to people at the time, and I'd finally risen out of internal studio obscurity to a position where I was leading my own series, so I didn't want to rock the boat or piss off anyone, so I kept my head down and just more or less started to nudge the series in the direction that other studio leads were expecting and talking about. As a result, we ended up creating a framing device based off one person's suggestion, and that created two separate narratives. The first being the narrative of each stable, with one stable per episode, and the second would then be the analyst, Butterfly Stitch, who would be present across every episode with a developing arc.
Then, at the same time, the studio also rejected the Brave New World song I'd been putting together. I'd worked with the L Train on completing an instrumental parody of 21st Century Cure from Repo the Genetic Opera.
Our beautiful nation once dazzled the globe.
Warning, this is not a drill. Equestria is under attack.
This was around the same time that one of the early versions of Terminal Secrets was also terminated for involving the Cutie Mark Crusader characters.
So, I had hit a few speed bumps while working at the studio, and to be fair, those were my fault, but the saga of the shit they pulled that wasn't my fault was about to begin at this point. See, I'd been given leave to create Terminal Secrets, and I was keeping studio leadership with Davy's help in a general state of clarity on what I needed and where I was going. The project was going to be quite art-heavy, it was going to have a big cast, it was going to tell the story of the Cutie Mark Crusaders making the decision to begin the Stable experiments, and in retrospect, the first iteration of Terminal Secrets was actually fairly bloated, it was unfocused, it was very messy. But Stable Tec didn't cancel Terminal Secrets because it was a fairly bloated, unfocused mess.
The new voice director didn't want to cast any more major story characters until we reached that part of the animated series. I'm not sure when exactly she expected us to reach episode 10 or 20 of the series, but I was still waiting on the pilot.
I was essentially instructed to trash everything I had been working on and bring them a brand new pitch that didn't have these elements. That was annoying, but whatever, don't get married to your baby. They were at least letting me re-pitch it in a different form, not cancelling it outright. This was just a delay, not a loss. I would just need to try again and work harder.
Another version of Terminal Secrets, which would have featured Red Eye, was also cancelled, and I think for the same reason. It wasn't just my two characters, though. Quite a large segment of the studio wanted to completely recast the entire main cast, aside from the fact that they'd already been established for a year and had their episode 1 lines done. James Vermont and I each had radio play productions which would have given the VAs great characters to voice, but were routinely attacked. Aside from the character and location names, the writing team was also in the process of completing 3 seasons worth of adapted screenplay scripts. These screenplays had begun straying quite wildly from the original source material, partially due to the C&D panic. Eventually, these 30 or so scripts would be thrown out as a more faithful set of screenplays were worked on.
Toward 2014, the writing team had created 2 full seasons worth of scripts, all of which had gone through multiple drafts. Each season was about 10 episodes long, and the story was differing massively from the source material, and not necessarily in a good way. See, there is a good way of making things different, cutting out arcs and characters that don't really have a payoff, or shortening plot lines, moving other events around, and slicing out multiple characters. These things can be done to improve a story structure and the economy, and to some extent we were actively doing that, trimming out certain scenes from the past and removing plenty of filler. But most of those changes, especially the changes that I made, were poor changes, mostly created out of ego, out of the belief that I could tell the story much better than how K-Cat had done. By this point, I had returned to the writing team and doubled down on my existing scripts. Directing and writing Terminal Secrets gave me a big head, and I was ready to try my luck on Mohan, who was contemplating ordering a full rewrite with the exceptions of episodes 1 and 2. He and Sonic had seen just how far the story had spun, partially out of C&D fears and partially out of creative reasons, and they decided, to my, at the time, horror and shock, to go with the rewrite.
In the end, I'd stepped on one too many tails, so my influence in the studio was fully reduced down to only the music team and Confessions of a Wasteland Pony. Not wanting to deal with the new names anymore, I began fashioning more new locations and characters for the stories, avoiding show character names as much as I could. A lot of my frustrations in Stable Tec ended up manifesting in the Confession storyline, which you can hear related to 10 Pony Tower and Stable Tec and the outside broadcasting studio as a whole. Those were the 2 most successful things in the studio, the songs and Confessions. As much as they might have wanted to, they couldn't stop me from releasing them.
I attempted to pitch Terminal Secrets 2 more times before it finally got accepted on that second pitch. This was to be 3 stables with the framing device returned, and this would be done across 4 20-minute episodes. It was actually fairly similar to version 1, but without the Cutie Mark Crusaders.
Be okay. I love you. Both of you.
We love you too.
Oh my god!
Hold on!
Oh god.
In the Fallout universe, October 23rd, 2077 was the day the nuclear war happens. I wanted to commemorate it with a special song that I'd been preparing with I Am Shadow 007. She'd become the singing voice of our Sweetie Belle, or Sweet Melody as the character was now called. That song was Get Happy, inspired by the House MD version of the big band classic. This time, I didn't even bother bringing it up to anyone else in the studio. I went to the only person that really mattered, Tyler Teschke, who was still universally recognized as the owner of the studio and channel. He did the art for Get Happy, and we posted it on October 23rd of 2014 to much acclaim.
Get your troubles, come on, get happy. Forget the Kaiser and dollar noise. Shout hallelujah, come on, get happy. Cause we've got the better toys. Forget your troubles, come on, get happy. Our steel girl's gonna kick some fling. Shout hallelujah, come on, get happy. For the finest looking set of rings.
Troubles, come on, get happy. Your body's only a slip away. Hallelujah, come on, get happy. Just order your ticket today. Forget the troubles, come on, get happy. For all the glitz and the shiny clothes. Hallelujah, come on, get happy. The stable's waiting to be your home. Waiting to be your home. Waiting to be your home. Waiting to be your home.
Terminal Secrets was cancelled yet again, with studio leadership wanting to put a halt to a new side project, as they called it, because they were afraid of a possible PR backlash to releasing a new project without any new updates to the animated series. But JD, who was getting ready to take on the position as studio co-director, encouraged me to keep the series ready for another potential rebirth.
Jingle bell, jingle bell, jingle bell rock. Jingle bell swing with the...
The last thing I did in 2014 was Jingle Bell Rock. It was going to be a follow-up to Nuclear Winter Wonderland, and I worked closely with Tyler for months ahead of time to make it a really solid story and production. But I wasn't the only one worn down by the studio, and I feel like Teschke was already kind of mentally checking out of everything. So while the audio production of Jingle Bell Rock was finished, Tyler didn't end up animating anything. The song was posted my channel, but it would be 2 more years before I posted both completely dramatized specials for the first time on YouTube. Felt like a completely new era at Stable Tec. Michael Brugioni was long gone, and JD had taken over as a sort of vice studio director under Michael Hall. I recognized that they didn't want to hear from me anymore, so I focused my time solely on music and confessions. With the music team, we had the tentative episode 2 and 3 scripts, and I was having both of those scored to the best that I could. I didn't have the team or ability to compose new big band songs, though, as the Wasteland Whalers were doing at Overmare Studios, so I just did the stuff I could. Confessions Episode 2 was released in January at the start of 2015, and people seemed to like that one too. However, you could already see in the comments section that people were dissatisfied by the progress of the animated series.
Once JD had taken over the role of co-director, he said to me they were willing to take another look at Terminal Secrets, though he implored me to keep this iteration as simple as possible. One stable, no frabbing device, less than 10-minute episodes, and no more than 10 episodes in total. So I decided to go for broke. I knew Skybolt had been looking to play the role of Red Eye, and that character had been my absolute favourite in the book, so I figured that telling an origin story for him set in Stable 101 would make for a really compelling narrative. So that's what I started working on. I started building up the story in my notebook, and within a month I had everything mapped out. I presented the ideas that were in there to the studio leadership, and again, they greenlit me.
I was on set in Durban working on a reality show when my bag was stolen. This is important because inside that bag was my notebook with all my notes relating to this newest version of Terminal Secrets. The shoot lasted for a total of 12 hours, and by the end of the day I couldn't find my bag. I couldn't find my notes. On the bus ride back home, I sent a message to the writing team letting them know what had happened. When I woke up back in Johannesburg, I realized that Sonic was arguing for Terminal Secrets to be cancelled. That was her reasoning. I lost my temper. I was exhausted. It was 1 a.m, and I spent the next 2 hours fighting to keep Terminal Secrets running, and my frankly overly aggressive tone did not help my argument at all. But JD and Sonic were adamant at the end of it. I didn't have my Terminal Secrets notes anymore, and they felt that was an appropriate enough reason to close production.
By the time I got home, exhausted, miserable, Terminal Secrets had been cancelled, and I was ready to leave the studio. I didn't. By the morning, I had cooled down, and Mohan, who'd become a constant mentor and friend to me, convinced me that I would gain more by staying than leaving. One Sunday, at the studio's weekly meeting, we were all treated to a fantastic piece of news. The animatic for episode 1 had been completed, and we were all able to watch it, and it felt fantastic. After a year and a half in production, we had the animatic done, and leadership was promising that we would be ready to release an entire first episode fully animated in time for BronyCon. We were going to show this episode to the public totally by surprise and just blow people away. The atmosphere at the studio after this was really, really fantastic. Any thoughts I'd had of jumping ship, in fact, any thoughts that a lot of people had had at this point about jumping ship were gone.
In spring of that year, many Stable Tec Studio members were at BabsCon 2015, and we were able to put on a large panel with many people. Despite some of the tense times in the past, that was probably the most fun I had at Stable Tec. We really had a fun time hanging out together that weekend at the convention.
Welcome back to the Stable Tec Studios Nature Channel. For this episode, we have a very special treat for you, as we have found a rare species indeed. Our representative Skybald is on the scene.
Here we see the wild Teshki in his natural habitat.
Yes. Oh. You will
As you can
never
see,
this like again.
As you can see, the wild Teshki works hard animating. The work is tiresome. He will search all throughout the night and only recover a minute or so. But it will be fruitful, and he'll continue on feeding his family, the hungry chicks that require
Please stop.
his animation.
No pressure.
We've been attacked. Get back to the chopper. Get to the chopper!
He's got the next platoon stalks of corn! No, not the phone!
Then, right after the fun of the convention came the Reddit leak, where some previous studio member laid out all of their grievances and tried to act like a Snowden-esque character.
So, wow, this was arguably the biggest thing to happen in Stable Tec's time. I remember waking up to find the business and lounge chats just exploding with angry studio members who'd seen the post a few hours before. Studio leadership was frantically trying to do damage control, and we were all instructed to stay away from the comment section of the leak until an official response could be made. Despite people in the leak's comment section saying that we'd been making an effort to downvote the post to hell, it really was the exact opposite, or at least officially. Some people might have ignored the leadership's instructions, but the studio tried to avoid that, knowing that it would only make us look worse.
I was named specifically in the leak like some kind of mob boss, and let me tell you, if I actually had the kind of influence he attributed to me, there would have been an episode release in 2014. But no, from the wording of the text, it all came down to the fact that he was upset that I chided him in one of the studio chat rooms. He had been going on in the chat room about how much better the VAs at Overmare Studios and Equestrian Broadcasting Company were compared to ours. And mind you, this is our public chat room where the VAs could see everything he was saying. Eventually, I'd had enough and told him to cut it out. I wasn't going to let our own team members be publicly derided like that in front of the rest of the studio. I didn't even know who this guy was. Apparently he was some part of the animation team? I can't speak for those grievances or what he actually might have produced for the studio. Maybe he was justified there. But I believe I was right by correcting him in that chat room. The studio had enough problems aside from people taking baseless swipes at each other. If I came across too harshly that day, then I do apologize, same as any other time people might have thought me too brash. But do I apologize for the content of what I said? No, not at all. The implication that somehow I was the gatekeeper or the one holding up the production is laughable. I hadn't had the position to comment on visual art for nearly a year, and most of what I said was a pretty fair assessment in retrospect. All the Reddit thing really amounted to was a way to complain about the lack of progress on episode 1, something I had been doing extensively the year before, when and where it actually mattered.
Nothing heard from the leak was particularly encouraging. I mean, I know the thing that seemed to get most people's goat was the renaming the characters, but I don't care about that really. It's the fucking chaos in the departments and the directors who had just completely buggered off.
That's quite interesting. See, my own work wasn't mentioned too much in the leak, so I'm not the most clued in on what's true and what wasn't. Despite the weekly meetings most departments really did kind of keep to themselves. The biggest issue for me was that they thought we had given the character Night Strawberry Lemonade from the existing book a daughter who would appear in the animated series, which was very, very wrong. So, JD and I had given Strawberry Lemonade a younger sister who wouldn't appear in the animated series in the slightest. No, she'd been a minor character in the sequel series that he and I had been toying with, which died months prior to this leak. Like, no one was touching or thinking about that series for a very, very long time. Outside of that, this leaker also revealed the changed names of the canon characters and locations, which was relevant to the writing team, and the writers agreed with him. You know, we didn't like that the names were changed, and we just did our best to make the changes as good as possible.
That drama pretty much dissolved most of the goodwill amounted for the animated series.
The leak just wrecked our image in the public eye, and look, I'm not going to stand on a soapbox and say he was entirely off base in all of his claims, primarily because I don't know the truth about a lot of the things he was saying. But at that point, I'd already dealt with so much of the studio's nonsense that I was and still am willing to bet that there are more than a few kernels of truth in those claims that don't relate to myself or Skybot.
My contribution to public relations was convincing people that we were running 100% of the time. I was about to quit then. That very moment I said, no, I can't carry on. But he said that, no, you're better than that. Pick yourself up and get back on it. So I did that. There are some wonderful people there that honestly try and do a hard day's work, or more so. But yeah, you're pissing in the wind with some departments, not to name names.
Ironically, one of the best comments in that thread was a guy saying that all he cared about was the next Confessions episode. It would only be a few weeks later that the Duchess Horror would release, with a haunting pipe organ music special to go with it. And again, people seemed to enjoy the Duchess Horror. I always strived to make each episode unique so people could appreciate them in different ways. After the Reddit drama, Fallout 4 was announced, and most of my faith in the animated series was basically already dead. It felt more like I was just renting out space in the studio. It was at that time that I set up the account for the Corp Productions YouTube channel. There were elements in the studio that really didn't like me, or Confessions, and one person in particular wanted to rip them down because the art style was too similar to the show, and not like the animated series. My curt response to this person was that I would leave the studio immediately and take all my stuff with me if someone tried to mess with Confessions. Luckily, that was the end of it. Creating the Corp channel was my lifeboat. I was ready to turn the key and pull out completely at any time. But I didn't leave. Not yet. I wasn't going to be run off from those fans and subscribers by people who had contributed relatively nothing. It was actually the European side of the studio that was most active on the animated series in 2015. That culminated in their panel at Galacon along with the decently made promo they had for it.
Hello everyone! Yes, it's that time of the year again already! We are fundraising to rebuild our hive and...
I joined Stable Tec Studios after seeing a presentation of theirs at Galacon. Their material was good, animation less so, but I've seen worse. Their PR was very good, and I've been wanting to join a studio at that time to work for a little while, and now they were actively looking for creators and promising most importantly, a product to put on my CV were I to actively help them in producing this series, I didn't even really think twice about sending an application to them. I, as a team manager and team leader, should have seen this project was dead from the start.
I would only become reinvested again when James Vermont was able to finally launch Terminal Secrets as a production.
So sometime around September, when the animated series had still not been completed and the writing team had more or less halted work as a result of managing to finish 13 episodes worth of more faithful rewrites by that point, I started working on Terminal Secrets again. This time, I decided that I was going to find a way of ensuring that the project wouldn't be cancelled.
They put out the call to have stable story ideas generated.
I figured that giving more people more of a stake in the series would give me a strong support system if another cancellation was thrown my way.
Luckily, I was allowed to submit stable story ideas too, ideas which would eventually become Episode 1, Dose, and Episode 5, Awake.
This also marked the first time that Skybolt and I would work together.
Dose in particular was very well received, in part because of the mind-bending twist that happens in the third act. It was decided almost immediately that that would become the pilot, thinking that it'd be the strongest way to kick off the series.
I accepted Skybolt's pitches for Dose and Hunger, and I agreed that Dose would make the strongest opening episode. It was the pilot. It was the most interesting of the ideas that were pitched at the time, and Dose was the one that felt most like it had been pulled directly from a Fallout game.
It was October of 2015 that the series and my episode were greenlit. I spent the next few weeks finishing my part of the script to hand off to James Vermont.
There's a place far from this cage with no more tears and no more rage, but these chains just pull.
People started quitting and more becoming inactive, down to the point where we lost basically all of our animators.
It's like the earlier you start something, the further passion will get you, because there's more energy around to fuel it. And then as time goes on, people will lose their enthusiasm for it. That's when passion will not get you as far, and you have to get more organized.
In early 2016, a large exodus of members left Stable Tec Studios, including our founder, Tyler Teschke. The animated series was basically dead at this point, flatlining on the metaphorical operating table. 2016 could be summed up as various people grabbing adrenaline syringes and defibrillators to try to resuscitate the series.
At the beginning of 2016, I started my first year of film school, which was certainly becoming a bit of a drain on my time, and wanting to focus my attention on school, I began to question just how much I was getting out of my time at Stable Tec. I decided I'd keep that on the down low, and I'd make a final choice if and when Terminal Secrets was released. This wasn't the furthest we'd ever got into production on the series. Remember, the first version of Terminal Secrets had an entirely completed first episode, which never saw the light of day, so I was still pretty concerned about the idea of studio leadership pulling the plug.
My very final act related to the animated series was releasing the ill-fated soundtrack album. It was a compilation of all the music composed for the series, as well as some other works by the various composers. It was my way of telling people how the music for the series would have been, how it would have sounded, how each area would have been characterized by a different style of sound. I think if we did get episode 1 out in 2014 or early 2015, most of those musicians would have still been active and enthusiastic parts of the team. But that's not how things worked out.
While I was at Stable Tec, I was the composer of Verismo, and I was also the audio editor of Terminal Secrets. I'm now working as a composer and audio editor at Corp, and I also became the audio team lead at the Overmare Studios. I found Stable Tec at 16. Already passionate about the fandom, I was in awe of them trying something so ambitious. And in my naivety and inexperience, I thought, sure, this could work. The lack of progress didn't bother me because they were still producing content. They looked active from the outside.
As far as the side projects go, though, it was a great time. 2016 amounted to there being no one left to constrain James Vermont and I to our creative potential. I worked with one of our final soundtrack musicians, Aqua Slavaro, to make the Never Make the Same Mistake parody to be the Terminal Secrets theme. Then in March of that year, the Ides of March to be exact, Terminal Secrets Episode 1, Dose, was released.
I remember the night before we released Dose to the public, so it was about 10 o'clock at night, I set the upload to start, and then I left it on while I tried to sleep and had actual nightmare after nightmare about all the negative comments that I was going to receive from audience members who were expecting the animated series just all the time. I was expecting a lot of, why did you make this? We didn't ask for this. What I was not expecting was waking up to just a slew of positive comments, more than I'd ever had on any project I'd worked on. There were complaints about the audio levels, which I'd messed up good and proper after doing the mixing myself, but the episode was overwhelmingly praised by listeners.
Although it had some audio mixing issues, people fell in love with it and were hungry for more.
To this day, I'm still annoyed, furious, for every single time that Stable Tec cancelled the series. Out of 5 attempts, 4 were cancelled, and the reasons behind 3 of them were petty and small. But we managed to put out the best version of Terminal Secrets that we could have come up with at the time, and seeing the positive response after spending nearly 2 years trying to get the series off the ground was just... it was really, really fantastic.
We even launched a new version of Stable Talk with a more conventional podcast-type format. James Vermont and I were both longtime Rooster Teeth fans, so our podcasting style was heavily influenced by the RT podcast. And because of that shared inspiration, we had great audio chemistry. The Stable Talk podcast would go on to become another favorite production on the channel. Unfortunately, a small but vocal group of people kept appearing in every comment section pleading for the animated series. After the Reddit thing, many people already recognized it as being a dead production. Some of them would show up just to vent their feelings, and I can't really blame them for that. But for James Vermont and I, it was soul-wrenching. We knew how hard each of us had fought to make the animated series happen. We were depressed by the death of it more than anyone. And yet, here were people acting like it was somehow our fault just because we were independently making things for the channel. Despite some casting challenges, I was finally able to get The Engineer produced in the summer of 2016. All of the lines were recorded, and the last of the art from Lee Chung was made. Unfortunately, he too would leave the studio, and that was a hard hit to Confessions. But in the wake of his departure, we gained a brand new team member who would become an integral part of our productions, James Kelly.
As fires burn out from yesterday, a wandering air's found a better way. For just as night seems most dark, the sunrise comes to warm our hearts.
From the ashes of war, through the blood and the gore, a man once born in this world that is torn. A group that cannot just be stopped or forgot will rise to overcome all odds. And with every new day, through the parts that we play, as we push fear away and remember the ways of a man who was kind and whose words will remind. Do better.
So I collect all my work together, fill out the application, and press send. And I was on top of the world. I was so excited for this. My dreams of what this could be was just... And not too long after sending in my application, I got an email from the head of HR at Stable Tec. And I was slowly becoming more and more wrapped up in this fantasy. My application was eventually approved and I was added to the records, and I also had to read through an 11-page member document. But I was in, and I was on top of the world. I began working for Skybolt on Verismo, and I also contacted James Vermont quite soon after to get myself on Terminal Secrets.
The album, Verismo, was beautifully assembled. I'd envisioned such an album as being like the Agatha violin station from Fallout 3, and Kelly definitely delivered.
Stable Tec was starting to face change across the entire studio. With Terminal Secrets finally airing and James Kelly joining the studio, there were projects that were finally being made. And of course, not every change was positive, with JD Parks and our storybook lead TK leaving the studio with several others. I'd had issues whilst working with JD in the past. I really liked him. He was a good guy. And he was doing his best to try and keep the studio running as smoothly as he could for as long as he could during one of its most turbulent times. The studio really did suffer when he left.
In the wake of all these successes, we released new episodes of the Stable Talk podcast regularly to discuss everything.
Stable Talk was a way for us to unwind and try to do some additional damage control for the fans that we still had left. It had been almost a year to the day since the Reddit leak. I think it was about 4 days off, but the relationship with the fan base was still on very shaky ground.
It was ultimately having these podcasts that led to our departure from Stable Tec Studios. After every podcast, where we tried to keep things funny and lighthearted for the most part, Vermont and I found ourselves venting about our frustrations for 30 minutes to an hour afterwards. We were making these great things, and yet we were still being seen as only side projects, living in the shadow of the animated series that was never going to happen.
See, we had this rule that I would reiterate before every single podcast, without fail. No talking about the animated series at all. We did our best to stick to this where we could, because if we mentioned the animated series, the audience would want to know where it was and why it wasn't being made, and this restriction was just infuriating us. It was wrong for us to be scared of our own fans. We hated being put in that position.
Vermont and I had both been haunted by this phantom production. We were both making what started out as side projects, but they were the true features of the channel. We put so much heart and soul into what we made, and then we saw them through to the end. We finished them, produced them, released them. Working together on Terminal Secrets and the podcast, we became closer friends and had this shared experience of having our productions dampered by too many cooks in the kitchen.
Once upon a time, in the magical land of Equestria, there came an era when the ideals of friendship gave way to greed, selfishness, paranoia, and a jealous reaping of dwindling space and natural resources.
Part of my attempt to fill the content vacuum was to get Michael Hall to let me use his audiobook reading of Fallout Equestria on the Stable Tec channel. He was still the studio's director at the time, and he trusted me enough to give me mostly free reign on whatever I was creating. After all, Skybolt, Kelly, and I were the only ones actively creating new content for the studio and keeping it alive. You'll notice that this year has had far less of a focus on other studio activities outside of myself and Skybolt, and that's honestly because they were done. We kept hearing in meetings, the puppets will be finished, but that still wasn't happening. And those had been one of the biggest issues from the beginning. That's where the bottleneck was. The scripts were done, the storyboards were done, the art was done, backgrounds for the full episode were done to the highest quality that we could get them, the animatic was done, the sound was mixed. The only thing that we needed to get to were the puppets, and the puppets would remain unfinished until the very end, when the studio was closed, but I'm not entirely certain when it started, but it was several years that we just didn't have puppets and that we kept being told that they were going to be finished. Part of my push around this time was to get the studio to release the episode 1 animatic. I tried to do so 1 or 2 times before, but with no luck, and this time it was still a bit of an uphill battle. My theory was that we could release the animatic as a way of reminding audiences that work hadn't been given up on the animated series, and we could also be giving them a bit of a content nugget, and we could also simultaneously ask for new studio members and say we needed help. My idea was not accepted. In those last few months at Stable Tec, I attempted to create a new department within the studio. I made a call for help to contact, and on the Stable Tec channel, just looking for new musicians, writers, artists, and these new crew members were not going to be assigned to the animated series, not a chance. At that point, I saw it as dead in the water, and I wasn't going to waste them on that. Instead, I created the alternate projects department, which would encompass everything Stable Tec did that wasn't the animated series. Even though I didn't know it at the time, this would become the foundation for East Corp Productions. After pushing the brick wall for months, I convinced studio leadership to give me all the different pieces of the animatic, and together with the head of puppets, Malicorn, I was able to put together the different scenes and fragments into a complete animatic, which opened with a plea from Mal for new studio members.
Hello everyone, my name is Malicorn, and I'm Stable Tec Studios Director of Puppet Building. We know you have all been very much anticipating our upcoming animated series, and we want to let you know that work is still well underway. At the moment, however, we are extremely short on animation staff, so at our current place, it'll be a very long time before a finished first episode is released. That said, anyone with experience animating in Adobe Flash CS6 or CC is encouraged to join us, and to anyone without those talents, we'd appreciate you spreading the word. An application page can be found in the description below or on our Stable Tec webpage. Feel free to share this link with anyone who might be interested. And since we haven't fully premiered our animatic online yet, we'll be bringing that to you today. Please note that most of the sound and animation present is not final, and any OCs used are merely placeholders and will not be in the final product. So without further ado, here you go.
At this point, I wasn't doing this to help the studio. Mostly, I was just curious to see what the public's response was going to be, and I was hoping it would calm down some of the frustrated fans who'd been complaining in the Terminal Secrets and Confessions comment sections about the animated series. Those comments and the fear of our own fan base was just... And those comments in the animatic, they were mixed.
I thought they were on a hiding to nothing the entire time, and the longer it went on, the less confident I got. I think by the time I saw the animatic, that was when the last glimmer of hope that anything might come of this was just snuffed out, because they'd been working on this thing for years, and the animatic was as far as it'd gotten. This was a 20-minute animatic, with like next to no finished art, and it only came across... It only told the story of the first chapter, and they wanted to do this for a whole series? I mean, like, do they know how labor-intensive studio animation is? Animation at all?
Some of them were entirely on base, like the comments asking why Earth ponies were firing rifles using hoof mounts. If you were looking for an official response, it's that the studio had a weapons expert on the team who insisted that all of these magical candy-colored horses using K-Cat's battle saddle design was unrealistic. The studio leadership actually went with this, resulting in battle saddles being scrapped in favor of more realistic weapons, because in this war that involved talking ponies, zebras, dragons, unicorns, and a battlefield-wide reincarnation, battle saddles would truly be a break of realism. Other comments were positive, praising the studio's work and giving us a fair bit more credit than we had deserved. Remember at this point that the animatic had been done for more than a year and a half. Now, there were plenty comments that were negative, with various people calling out what amounted to every element of the production. But those weren't the comments that truly caught mine and Skybolt's eyes. And how many of them we agree with and disagree with isn't really relevant. No, it was the comments celebrating that Stable Tec had actually created content. And always phrased like that across so many videos. Like our years of hard work and fighting to get our audio dramas on the ground just didn't exist in their eyes.
The final thing I made for Stable Tec Studios was our third annual Fallout Day song, Dashite Song, a rewrite of The Humbling River by Pucifier.
Shortly after this point, Terminal Secrets was nominated for an Audioverse Award for Best Writing in a Fan Production, as well as Madeline Goshorn's performance as the Crusader mainframe. I'd like to consider this to be one of the final nails in the coffin for my time at Stable Tec. Every stumbling point, every argument over getting the series greenlit, every fight born out of someone's ego, and every comment that we'd had begging for an animated series that would never be made, I had found a way to grow from my mistakes and from every conflict that I ended up in. I was getting ready to start a new chapter of my life. But Stable Tec hadn't grown, it just remained this constant, stubborn beast. I had outgrown the studio. I was tired of trying to put out fires, do damage control, ask studio leadership for permission, live in the shadow of the animated series, and try to repair the damage done to the studio when what I wanted to do was build upwards.
Just days after that, we had our 4th Stable Talk podcast, and after the podcast, Vermont told me that he was done. He couldn't stand to see those comments anymore. We were producing these quality radio plays, and they were being burdened by great expectations. They would never be able to stand on their own merit on the Stable Tec channel. We had to leave. I told Vermont I'd been feeling that way for a long time and showed him the East Corp channel I had set up nearly a year and a half earlier. With James turning that key, everything fell together quite perfectly.
He showed me East Corp's channel, we grabbed James Kelly, and we were out of there.
We left the studio on October 29th of 2016. I'd been with Stable Tec for over 3 years. The first video posted on the East Corp channel was the original version of Confessions of a Wasteland Pony, Episode 1, The X-Raider. It had all the original show names added back into it. Ponyville, Celestia, Luna. All of the original Confessions episodes were posted on there with the new East Corp Productions branding. Along with them, all of the Balefire Symphony music was uploaded there too, including Brave New World. Vermont uploaded the remastered Terminal Secrets Episode 1 along with Episode 2. James Kelly came with us as a third pillar and founder of East Corp Productions. Quite a few artists and voice actors joined us as well. Most of the things they'd done with Stable Tec were for our productions. I posted a video on my own channel explaining what happened and where to find us. James Vermont posted the explainer on the Stable Tec channel. It was the last video posted on the Stable Tec channel until the shutdown announcement 6 months later.
Every story must come to an end.
I honestly, more than anything, hoped that our leaving would be enough of a spark to get them to at least finish Episode 1. I had finished all the audio 2.5 years ago. All of the backgrounds were finished. All the storyboards were laid out. Everything was in place for them to finish that episode. James and I even joked about how they could end the series with the one episode, make it an alternate ending where Little Pip leaves Stable 2, sees Velvet Remedy's dead body, and then she also dies of radiation poisoning. It would have been a laugh, and the audience would have been disappointed, but at least there would have been the one episode. At least all of the efforts wouldn't have been in vain. In a lot of ways, East Corp is our way of making sure those efforts weren't wasted. We are making the most of the music and art contributed to the studio by so many talented people, and we finally have a place where our series can stand on their own and come to the fitting conclusions they were meant to see. We continued the new podcast format we'd established as the Break Room Podcast, and now have added over 50 new episodes to that series. One of the first things we did at East Corp was revive another rejected Stable Tec production, The Wasteland Survival Guide. Instead of a text-only website format, they became mini radio plays presented by our newly cast Ditzy-Doo, Needle Stitch. Needle would become an honorary founder and an integral part of East Corp Productions, her creative and production skills being matched only by her voice acting prowess.
I mean, you can kind of see a lot of the fandom in Stable Tec, just that kind of naive pursuit of the grand idea. I think having that is a good thing, that you have the grand idea and you are giving it a go, even if you don't necessarily know how to get there. But Stable Tec also kind of shows the inability to learn, because you aren't going to get there unless you learn how to get there on the way. And the people from the fandom who have kind of made a career for themselves out of what they've done and are still doing that kind of thing instead of having like faded away into obscurity, they did learn how to get how to follow the grand idea. But I think there's kind of a tragedy in Stable Tec in this pursuit of the grand idea that ultimately kind of imploded under the collective inability to figure out how to do it.
Trotting through the orange-covered fields, standing strong without yield. We are flying free through every darker storm, and like those orange trees, we're hidden from the world as the Gilded Age is ending. As the Gilded Age is ending. Airships rising high.
In January of 2017, East Corp fully proved itself as a studio. We released the third episode of Terminal Secrets, Hunger, another episode written by both Vermont and myself, and then we released the fifth episode of Confessions of a Wasteland Pony, The Ranger. We already had several podcast and Wasteland Survival Guide episodes released as well. Since then, we've released Terminal Secrets Episode 4, Tinned Mint, Confession 6, The Ice Mare, Terminal Secrets 5, Awake, Confession 7, The Mercenary, and the exciting finale of Terminal Secrets. Wasteland Survival Guide will have finished with nearly 50 episodes, and we've continued to release Balefire Symphony music to the same quality and acclaim that we had done with Stable Tec.
East Corp had become our new home, a place where we were building something entirely new and entirely ours. We weren't scared of our fans anymore, we were befriending them and connecting with them, which is how it should be.
Aside from our various Fallout Equestria productions, East Corp has also become the home of our other original series as well, beginning with Untypical and many others to come.
And whilst we've yet to hit the same viewing numbers as we did on the Stable Tec channel, we are much happier here, and given the choice again, I would still have left.
They could have just abridged the story. You know, even with the best will in the world, even with, you know, proper management, getting the right people, getting people who know what they're doing, you could have, like, the entirety of DHX on your team, including the management staff and agents to get them to go around, all giving their voluntary time, and you'd get to, like, episode 3, and everyone would just kind of give up if they were going by the original plan of do the whole story. Like, there's just no two ways about it. You can't adapt the whole thing on spare time.
I remained in contact with members of Stable Tec whilst they tried to think of what to do next. Sky and I had hoped that our leaving and taking our series with us would have given them enough of a kick to get them through releasing the first episode, and to be fair, in our last meeting at the channel, they did start brainstorming a few new ideas. They were particularly floating around the suggestion that they take the existing assets and build the first episode as more of a visual novel or motion comic, which would have disappointed fans, but at the very least it would have resulted in something. That's not what happened in the end, and I struggled to maintain contact with them as the months went on. Michael Hall, who had for a long time tried to keep the studio going, resigned as director and Knightley took over. By this point, knowing the studio would never release the episode, I believed it was important for them to announce that the studio had closed. Provide some sort of closure to the fans rather than making them believe that this was going to happen. I sent a message through to the team as a suggestion. And I guess they must have been at similar minds because not long after, the studio announced that it was closed.
The studio was already at a standstill. No amount of help from my end would have really fixed anything. I had two choices. One to try and rebuild again and start from scratch, or to shut down the studio and release all the assets we've made so far to the public. Hello everyone. It's been a while, hasn't it? You're probably wondering where episode 1 is, or why we've been so silent recently. The only thing we as a studio can say is sorry. Sorry that it's been taking so long and not much has been said about it. Please note that I am not making this video to try and cause any trouble. I feel that everyone needs to know what's been going on in the past few months. For those of you who don't want to hear the entire story, the production of Episode 1 and the Fallout Equestria series is being cancelled. This, in other terms, means that Stable Tec Studios is shutting down. This will more or less be the last video on this channel unless something changes. With that said, if you enjoyed Terminal Secrets or the audiobook series, links in the description will direct you to the correct channels to view that content. It's being made by some amazing people that are still actively working on Fallout Equestria materials. We wish you a nice day, and thanks for the ride.
Unfortunately, and this is pretty damned ridiculous, but they uploaded it on the last day of March, just as the other YouTube channels around the internet were uploading their April Fool's jokes. On realizing this, I had to quickly log into their account and post a comment just clarifying that this video was not a joke. Because of course Stable Tec had to end like that, because of course it had to end feeling like a joke. I've put years of my life into working at that studio, and my time there had a huge effect on who I am as a person. At the time of recording, I'm a few years out of university, trying to make it on my own as a freelance writer and animator, and I've been forced to look back at my life and at who I was. I'm forced to re-examine what my ego was at the time and think about the mistakes I made. I'm forever thankful to the people who stuck by my side through all of that and who made me a better person.
It was a bit of a breeding ground for talent, because for every, that note I got from Friendly Raider to a random bunch of artists, some of them would have responded to that, and they would have been set to work doing something, and it could have, given them the start, and then someone else who had a better idea what they were doing could have, poked them, basically. And that could have happened in all kinds of fields. And I think that's kind of the value of failed projects like this, where it can, serve as the start, the training grounds for better things.
Don't take yourself too seriously, to the point where you think it's a job and a chore, because if it's a passion project, you're going to lose the love for it, and that's the thing that's keeping you going. It's not the money at the end of the day, it's the people and the love for them.
And now, years later, it kind of feels like a distant memory. I'm coming up to finish my third year of university. East Corp has been going for years. My wish for an animated series is still there, but you need a lot more than passion to make something like that a reality.
In the technical sense, the thing that ended Fallout Equestria, the animated series, was the lack of animation puppets. But ultimately, that was just a symptom. Stable Tec Studios was an example of great expectations built on top of paralyzing fear. The fear of receiving a cease and desist governed the thoughts of too many in the leadership. Even though our channel was 1,000 times smaller and less well known as something like Jan Animations or Fighting is Magic, it was already 1,000 times greater in the minds of those same people. This inconsistency completely destroyed the series, and all sense of practicality and production were completely ignored. Stable Tec ended up being the great experiment to see if K-Cat's novel, combining the unlikely worlds of Fallout and My Little Pony, could be made into a series. Although the animated series did not succeed, it brought about so many opportunities, so many experiences for so many artists and creators around the world. It developed the skills and abilities of everyday people just trying to leave their mark and tell their own stories.
In my eye, the story of Stable Tec is the story of every passionate group of fans who've tried to create something in the image of something else that they love. In one of these moments, one of these events, creators might see themselves or things that have happened to them. I'm not going to pretend that we were unique, but I think that's what makes the story all the more special. We were the product of the great experiment. It helped turn me into the writer I am today. It helped East Corp be born. From my perspective, I'd say the experiment succeeded, just not in the way it intended to. And that's completely okay.
Stable Tec is what happens when passion meets reality.